History often remembers the Vikings only as raiders, ruthless warriors, sea invasions, burning villages. But if that were the whole story, they could never have survived in a world like the North Atlantic. Because the Vikings' greatest strength was not brutality. Their greatest strength was adaptability. While great empires were collapsing under their own complexity, the small coastal societies of Scandinavia were learning an entirely new way to survive. They did not see the oceans as barriers. They did not try to conquer nature. They learned to understand it, and that became their greatest technology. This is not the story of conquerors. This is the story of a society that mastered survival. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, Europe slowly began to change. The order that had held the continent together for centuries was now breaking apart. Trade routes had become unsafe. Old roads were falling silent. Cities were growing weaker, and political power was losing control. At the same time, the climate was becoming harsher. Cold seasons were growing longer. Growing seasons were becoming shorter. Harvests were no longer as reliable. While great empires depended on stability, instability became a crisis for them. Because large systems can be powerful, but slow to change. But the world of Scandinavia was different. Deep fjords, rocky coasts, harsh winters. It was a world where only those could survive who learned to adapt quickly. So Norse societies stayed small, localized, and constantly changing themselves. If crops failed, the sea provided food. If one trade route collapsed, another was found. They did not try to stop uncertainty. They had already learned to live with it. And slowly, that adaptability became their greatest strength. For the rest of the world, the North Atlantic was a barrier, cold, dangerous, almost uninhabitable. But the Norse turned it into a route. And the biggest reason for that was their longship. It was not just a ship. It was the result of survival engineering. Its design was built for speed, but not only for speed. Its hull was light, strong, and flexible enough to move with violent waves. Where other ships fought against the power of the sea, Norse ships worked with it. Their shallow draft design allowed them to travel even through shallow waters. They could move deep into rivers, travel quickly along coastlines, and land directly on shores. That meant fewer limits, more mobility, more options. And in a world like the North Atlantic, options become survival. Longships were not just transportation, they were machines that turned movement into an advantage. And slowly, the same sea that had kept other societies apart began connecting the Norse world. But mobility alone was not enough. Crossing the sea was one thing. Surviving in a world like the North Atlantic was a completely different challenge. In Scandinavia and the Northern Islands, farming was never easy. Land was limited. Growing seasons were short, and the weather was unreliable. If Norse societies had depended only on traditional farming, their survival would have been difficult. So they changed their food strategy. The sea was not just a route, it was also a source of food. Fishing became part of their economy. Marine animals provided food, oil, and resources. Seabirds were also part of their seasonal survival system. Instead of relying on a single resource, they learned to use the entire coastal environment. That was their strength. If one thing became scarce, another was available. If farming weakened, the sea provided support. They did not try to force the environment to fit their needs. They learned to work with its patterns. And slowly, survival became for them not just a matter of strength, but a game of adaptation. But gathering resources was not enough. In the world of the North Atlantic, shelter was just as important for survival. And the Norse understood this well. When they built new settlements, they did not simply choose empty land. They studied wind direction, they read the local climate, and they chose places where survival was more likely between cold, wind, and terrain. Their settlements did not follow a fixed blueprint. They changed with the environment. Their longhouses were also part of this adaptation. Thick sod walls, peat insulation, few openings, everything designed to keep heat inside. Because in a world like the Arctic, wasted heat was not just discomfort, it was a risk. Their homes were not built for comfort. They were survival engineering against the climate. And slowly, Norse societies adapted not only food systems, but entire living systems to the environment. While many civilizations depended on stability, the Norse were building resilience. Great empires often appear powerful. Massive armies, large bureaucracies, trade networks stretching across vast distances. But within their strength, a weakness is hidden: complexity. Because the larger the system, the more failure points it creates. They require constant stability, reliable communication, stable administration, predictable trade. But when the world starts becoming unstable, that same strength can slowly turn into a burden. Rulers far away cannot quickly understand every local problem. Decisions become slower, resources arrive late, and small disruptions begin spreading through the entire network. Large, centralized systems may be powerful, but they are slow to adapt. And in a harsh world like the North Atlantic, slow response itself could become a risk. That was the point where many great systems began to struggle. But the Norse world worked differently. It had no single great center, no vast bureaucracy, no single capital whose fall could break the entire system. Decision-making was more local, communities were smaller, and problems were often solved at the local level. An important part of this system was the Thing assemblies. This was where disputes were settled, decisions were made, resources were negotiated. It was not a perfect system, but it was flexible. If one settlement weakened, others could continue. If one trade route failed, another could be adopted. Their world did not depend entirely on stability. It was built on adaptation. And perhaps because of this, there was no single target whose destruction could bring down the Viking world. They could not eliminate instability, but they had learned to survive inside it. Today's world is more connected than ever before. Global trade, massive supply chains, vast infrastructure systems, everything is linked together. And that connection is also our greatest strength, but perhaps our greatest vulnerability too. Because the more complex the system, the more failure points it creates. One disruption can create effects thousands of kilometers away. One supply issue can impact an entire network. And climate instability is adding even more pressure. Rising heat, extreme weather, unpredictable environments. In many ways, the modern world also stands on complexity, and that is why the question of resilience has become more important than ever. But the story of the Vikings is not trying to offer modern solutions. It shows a pattern. The world changes, conditions change, old systems begin to feel pressure, and then some societies adapt quickly, some adapt slowly. The greatest strength of the Norse was not just their ships. Their greatest strength was flexibility, the ability to function within uncertainty. And perhaps that is their greatest legacy too, because in history, survival does not always belong to the most powerful. Often, it belongs to those who do not wait for the world to change. They change themselves first.